Whenever I make a video about a particular subject, I almost always have to draw a line somewhere and cut out games that otherwise could easily be included under the topic. Knowing that was strongly the case with my 10 great-looking Sega Master System games episode, I decided to split it up so I could do more than just 10 games. This second episode is entirely made up of games that were recommended by the viewers from the first episode. If you're a Master System fan, you are going to be getting lots more great-looking games for the platform as chosen by your fellow commenters. Let's waste no more time and jump right in to great-looking Sega Master System games, Viewer Edition. Our first game is 1988's Kenseiden from Sega. This one features an awesome FM soundtrack, large characters, and some decent animation. I'm not a big fan of the way it plays, but I can't argue with the fact that it has a strong visual style. This one was released in every major territory, and as I mentioned, uses the FM sound unit. Another 1988 release was Powerstrike, a vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up originally developed by Compile and redone by Sega. Lots of sprites on the screen in this one, though I'm not too impressed by the background graphics. Still, it is a good-looking game, and I definitely appreciate the FM sound support. (1992's Alien 3 is really similar to the Genesis game of the same name, both developed by Probe Software. I can't say this one is a game I choose for an episode like this based solely on its visuals. The sprites are small, and the background's not particularly impressive, nor is the animation. I will say that it is a very decent playing game though, and in some ways, I actually prefer it to the 16-bit version. In 1993, a company called Graft Gold did the Ottifants for the Master System, an incredibly annoying action platformer with a jarringly jerky screen transition left to right, and some of the most mind-numbing music in any Sega Master System game I've ever played. It does have large sprites, lots of color, and some okay animation, but I can't stomach this game for more than 5 minutes before a splitting headache has me heading straight for the power button and some aspirin. I know some of you like it, but it's just not for me. In 1991, Sega released the internally developed Asterix, an action platformer that sports a ton of great qualities. Aside from having elements from every good platformer under the sun, it also happens to be a great looking game as well. The two main characters are large, well animated, and full of detail, as are the enemies. The stages are varied and it gets really challenging later in the game. And while we are on the subject, check out 1993's Asterix and the Secret Mission as well. It's another one by Sega, and it looks even better in every category I just mentioned, and has better sound to boot. This is a great series all around and highly worth checking out. In 1993, somebody at Tiertex and US Gold decided to port EA's James Pond 2, codenamed Robocod, to the Master System. You'd expect these two companies to churn out something akin to an anal probe, but surprisingly, this isn't so bad. The graphics are actually fairly good. Bright colors, excellent animation, and the music doesn't blow out your hearing. It suffers from severe repetition in its stages, and it isn't going to be on anybody's top 10 lists, but I have seen many worse looking Master System games. With Nintendo's bullshit monopoly coming to an end, Sega wanted a Ninja Gaiden of their own. 1992's Master System release was a gorgeous game full stop. Great looking character and enemy sprites, incredible backdrops, and brilliant animation all paint the screen with an adventure that you must absolutely take if you're a fan of the series. Gameplay is similarly awesome, with wall jumps, different sub-weapons, and lots of variety in each stage to overcome. Like the NES game, it gets pretty hard the second half of the game, so you are guaranteed some replay value. In 1992, Sims and Sega got together to release Tom and Jerry the Movie, an action platformer with excellent animation and some nicely detailed backdrops. I really don't like the gameplay much here, however. You can get used to it, but it's slow and grows a bit tiring after extended play. Still, I can't deny it looks pretty good. Lots of people out there love the Vic Tokai developed Psycho Fox for the Master System. It's a pretty game with strong animation and excellent color for the characters and backgrounds. For all its visual appeal, however, I cannot stand the way it plays. The jump is completely borked and has a really weird momentum mechanic to it that I just can't adjust to. It results in death in the most simplest of circumstances, causing me to rage quit after a few minutes. My daughter couldn't stand it either. In 1988, Sega had Compile port R-Type to its 8-bit machine. It may surprise many of you, but I do not feel this game belongs in this episode. I fully admit that R-Type here is a good game, and it does indeed look great at times. It even has an excellent FM soundtrack. Porting this game to a system released in 1985 is no small thing, however, and the end result just has too many visual compromises. Aside from the slowdown that is prevalent throughout, the massive amount of sprite flicker is jarring. I mean, it can literally make your entire ship disappear at times. It's worse on some stages versus others, and boss fights tend to be its peak. I like R-Type, don't get me wrong, but it definitely has its issues. In 1993, Probe Software did Desert Speedtrap starring Roadrunner and Wile Coyote for Sega, in what is quite frankly one of the prettiest games on the platform. It plays a bit funky, but is otherwise a game that is absolutely loaded with excellent color, animation, and details throughout. You won't find a single ugly scene in this game, and it even sports some excellent layering effects in the backdrops. It's a beauty. In 1993, Sega released Wonder Boy in Monster World, an action-adventure game with RPG elements. These games always looked good, but this one is up there with some of the very best visuals this system has ever produced. huge sprites, top animation, and enough color on the screen to make you think you're looking at a TurboGrafx game in action. It's that damn good. In my first video, I had Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap, mainly because I liked that game quite a bit, but this one stands on its own merits and deserves to be here as well. Remember the Sega Genesis port of Virtua Fighter 2? Well, in 1996, some fool at a small studio called Aspect felt his sack was bigger and more impressive, so he decided to bring Virtua Fighter to the freaking Game Gear. Based on the anime that was based on the arcade game, it's a 2D one-on-one fighter with characters and moves from Sega's Model 1 Classic. Well, in 1997, Tectoy wanted in on that action, and they brought it out to the Master System. Aside from not playing nearly as bad as you'd expect, it also happens to look okay as well. The animation is the highlight, and if you have never tried this one, it's worth a few minutes of your curiosity. Tectoy wasn't done with their insanity, and in 1997 they attempted to bring none other than Street Fighter II to the Master System. You heard that right, Street Fighter II. This was never going to be accurate, of course, but you have to admire the passion. Large fighters that are incredibly well detailed highlight the visuals, and there is more animation here than you'd expect. The music even represents the source faithfully. The gameplay is completely different, and purists will scoff after only a few seconds with the controller, but it exists and looks better than it has any right to. In 1987, Sega ported the Superscalar Classic Space Harrier to its Master System. This impossible task would result in a slower, choppier, and ultimately uglier game that was nowhere near the glory of the arcade. In case you hadn't guessed, I was not a fan. I have no problem admitting I am in the minority, however, as many Master System fans loved it. They dug the massive enemies, smooth scrolling floor, and abundance of color. I respect it, but it wouldn't be on my list of great-looking games. In 1989, Sega's excellent Reggie Jackson Baseball was released. Sports games rarely get their due in retro gaming, but I have zero issues pimping this classic game. The visuals here are outstanding. You get an animated crowd, a playfield that has umpires, base coaches, dugouts, and stadium accents like walkways and stairs. I really love the way the baseball scales as it's blasted into the air, a feature that returned for Tommy Lasorda's outing on the Sega Genesis. This one plays well too, and despite its age and lack of any real teams, it's still one of the best playing sports titles of its era. Sega and Sims got together in 1993 to completely rip off Castlevania for the Master System, with Master of Darkness. It looks like Castlevania, it plays like Castlevania, and it even sounds like Castlevania at times. That's good enough for me and one hell of a compliment. Master System games rarely imitated the grittier look of NES games so well, and yet still manages to show off that great on-screen color advantage. It makes me wish they had done a Genesis version as well. In 1988, Sega dropped Lord of the Sword on the Master System, a side-scrolling action RPG with large, well-animated characters sporting tons of color. This one falls down primarily due to the lack of background details in many scenes. Sometimes it's completely lacking anything at all, and it's just a single solid color. I also am not a fan of the way it plays, but that nice FM soundtrack does elevate it a bit. In 1995, Cryo Interactive Entertainment, the company behind the Saturn PAL exclusive Atlantis The Lost Tales, teamed up with Sega to release Cheese Cat-Astrophe starring Speedy Gonzales for the Sega Master System. I'm gonna be blunt here, this game plays terribly and sounds even worse. But for all its problems in these two areas, you have to admire the visual prowess on display. Animation, detail, color, art design, environments, it all just looks so good. This one could have used a few more months on the gameplay side, as it could have easily been a classic. In 1994, Sega and Aspect teamed up to do Deep Duck Trouble starring Donald Duck. You rarely can go wrong with Disney properties on Sega's machines, and this is another powerfully good effort. It has all the animation and detail you expect, plays great, and even allows you to take the adventure in whatever order you see fit. The only negative I can level at this is that it does have some annoying slowdown here and there that does grate a bit, but otherwise it easily earns its spot on this list for its excellent presentation. Jurassic Park made the rounds in 1993 for all of Sega's machines, including the Master System. This one was done internally by Sega and surprisingly, ain't such a bad game. This one was recommended by RGT85 himself, and you know, I'd have to agree. Visually it has a number of things going for it, including some great layering effects in the backgrounds, lots of animations, impressive set pieces, and an environment that is alive with wind, rain, fire, and lightning. It can definitely be a visual feast at times, and the gameplay variety keeps things interesting. I'd even go so far as to say, this is a better playing game than its 16-bit counterpart. That wraps up our second episode of great-looking Sega Master System games. Between myself and the viewer recommendations, we covered a lot of excellent-looking 8-bit software here. Even so, there are still many more on Sega's Z80 Beast that could be featured in a Part 3 down the road. That's something I have always appreciated about this machine, its ability to keep on giving when it comes to surprisingly good games. I missed so much as a kid that even today I run across games I haven't seen much of. Many of the Master System games featured here never saw a US release, but luckily can be gotten on Sega's portable Game Gear platform. Many of them aren't just lookers either, they also happen to play pretty damn well. I highly advise you give them all a few minutes of your time and decide for yourselves whether they are worth further attention. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.